Every night for 15 years, Walter Higgins left his porch light burning until sunrise. Long after the electric bill stopped making sense. Long after the neighbors on Birch Lane stopped asking why. He was 71, a retired conductor for the old Maple Hollow line, and if you asked him directly why the light stayed on, he'd tell you it was for moths, or for burglars who ought to think twice, or for nothing at all, mind your business. He would not tell you the truth, which was that on a July night 15 years ago, his son Michael had stood in that doorway with a duffel bag over one shoulder. And Walter, furious and certain he was right, the way a man can be certain and wrong at exactly the same time, had said, "Then don't bother coming back." Michael hadn't. Walter told himself for a long time that the fight had been about the motorcycle, or the dropped semester, or the girl Michael wouldn't stop seeing. It took him years to admit, mostly to no one, that it had really been about a father who didn't know how to say he was scared of losing his son. So he'd said something that guaranteed it instead. He left the light on that first night out of pure stubbornness. If the boy came back at 2 in the morning, Walter wasn't going to make him fumble for his keys in the dark. Then one night became 1,000, and Walter stopped examining the habit too closely, the way you stopped noticing a scar. On a cold October night, the light caught something it wasn't meant for. Walter heard the dog barking before he heard anything else, and when he came out onto the porch in his robe, there was a girl sitting in the ditch beside his mailbox, knees pulled to her chest, a backpack that had clearly been packed in a hurry. She was wearing a thin jacket too light for the weather, and she kept one hand curled tightly around the strap of the bag, as if someone might still try to take it. "You're on private property," he said, which was true and also not the point. "I know." She didn't move. "Your light was on. I figured that meant somebody was still up." He almost told her to move along. He was tired, and it was cold, and he had spent 15 years learning exactly how much of himself he was willing to give to people who might just leave anyway. But something about the flat, practiced way she said it, like she'd used that exact excuse on exact porches before, made him stay put. "How old are you?" Old enough not to answer that. 16, then. He'd guessed right, judging by how her jaw tightened. "You got somewhere to be?" "Not really." Cold night for not really. She looked at him for the first time, sizing him up the way kids do when they're deciding whether an adult is a threat or just an inconvenience. Whatever she decided, it wasn't threat. She stood up, brushed off her jeans, and said, "You got a bathroom I could use? I'll be gone in 10 minutes. She wasn't gone in 10 minutes. She fell asleep on his couch instead, still in her coat, sneakers still on, one arm locked around the backpack like it might disappear if she loosened her grip. Walter sat in his armchair across from her most of the night, not sleeping, listening to the house make its old sounds, thinking about another kid on another couch a long time ago who used to fall asleep with the television still going. Her name was Sam. She didn't offer a last name, and Walter didn't ask twice. She came back 3 more times that month, always after dark, always leaving before he woke. He started leaving food out, nothing that looked deliberate, just leftovers he wasn't going to finish, conveniently placed on the counter. She never thanked him out loud. Instead, she washed the plate she'd used and set it in the rack with a kind of careful quiet that suggested she'd learned, somewhere, that making noise could cost you. The 4th time, She stayed long enough for him to make coffee, and long enough for a conversation that neither of them planned. "You always up this late?" she asked. "Old men don't sleep much." "That why the light's on, in case you can't sleep either?" Walter didn't answer that directly. "You want to tell me why you keep ending up on my porch instead of your own? You want to tell me why a porch light's been on 15 years for nobody?" That landed harder than she probably meant it to. Walter set his coffee down. "Fair enough," he said. "We'll both mind our own business then." But she came back again the following week, and this time she talked. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. A stepfather who filled the house with a kind of quiet that was worse than yelling. The kind of quiet that made you measure every footstep. A mother who loved her and also couldn't seem to choose her, not in any way that mattered. Sam had learned that the safest thing in that house was to not be in it. She had a habit of sitting with her back to the wall. She checked the street through the window before she ever relaxed her shoulders. Once, when Walter's old dog lumbered into the room without warning, Sam flinched so hard she knocked her coffee. She apologized 3 times in the span of a minute, already on her feet, already calculating the nearest exit. Walter cleaned it up without comment and poured her another cup. She watched him do it like she was waiting for the catch. "Nobody's looking for me," she said one night, like she was testing whether that fact would change how he looked at her. "I doubt that's true." "You don't know my family." "No," Walter agreed. "But I know what it looks like when somebody stopped looking, and this isn't that. This is somebody scared to ask the wrong question in case they get an answer they can't do anything about." Sam didn't say anything to that, but she didn't leave right away either. She sat with her knees drawn up on the couch, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve, and for a while the only sound was the clock in the hall and the occasional shift of the dog's paws on the floorboards. Weeks passed. She showed up less like a stray and more like a standing appointment, never announced, never quite invited, but expected. Walter found himself buying groceries with a 16-year-old's appetite in mind without ever deciding to. He noticed she always left the same way. Coat on before she reached the door, backpack already shouldered, a quick glance left and right before stepping onto the porch. As if the dark itself needed checking. Then, in November, she stopped coming. A few days at first, which wasn't unusual. Then a week. Then 2.5 weeks with no sign of her, no way to reach her. Walter didn't have a phone number, didn't know a last name, didn't know which house on which street. He found himself walking to the end of his driveway at odd hours, looking down Birch Lane like that might change anything. He caught himself listening for the dog to bark at nothing. He got as far as looking up the non-emergency police line before he set the phone back down, understanding he had nothing to tell them. Not her last name, not her address, not even a solid reason to believe something was wrong beyond the fact that a girl who owed him nothing had stopped showing up. He thought about Michael more than he had in years. He thought, this is what it must have felt like on the other end, all this time. Wondering, without any way of finding out, whether the light was still on. He did not let it go dark. On the 19th night, she was back, sitting on the top step like she'd never been away. A bruise faded to yellow-green along her jaw that she didn't offer an explanation for, and he didn't ask about, not yet. "You could have told me you weren't dead," Walter said, which came out harsher than he meant it to, mostly because his hands weren't quite steady. Sam looked at him for a second, surprised. Like she hadn't considered that someone kept count. "I didn't think you'd noticed I was gone," she said. 19 days, Walter said. "I noticed." He didn't ask about the bruise until much later. And when she finally told him, it wasn't the whole story. It was never the whole story with Sam. But it was enough to understand why she'd stayed away. And enough to understand why, eventually, she'd come back anyway. One night not long after, she asked why a man who lived alone kept a second coffee mug in the cabinet. Walter told her about Michael, mostly because the question deserved a real answer, and partly because she'd earned the right to one, in the way people earn things by staying when it would be easier not to. 15 years, she repeated, like she was doing the math on her own patience. "And you never called him?" "I wrote letters I never sent. That's not the same as calling." "Why not just call?" "Because he might not pick up. And I don't know which is worse, him not picking up or me finding out I really did lose him." Sam looked at him for a long moment. There wasn't much sympathy in it, which was somehow more useful than if there had been. "You left a light on for a kid for 15 years, she said. "And you're going to sit there and tell me you're too scared to send a text message." Walter almost laughed. Almost. "You're one to talk about being scared to go home," he said. "Yeah," Sam said. "I am one to talk. That's exactly why I get to say it." She picked at the loose thread again, then tied it off with a small, decisive knot. "My mom used to leave the hallway light on when I was little. Said it was so I wouldn't be scared of the dark. After he moved in, the light stopped. She said it wasted electricity. I think it was just easier not to see what was happening in the rest of the house." Walter didn't fill the silence. He let it sit. "I'm not telling you that so you'll feel sorry for me," Sam added. "I'm telling you because you keep acting like you're the only person who's ever been too proud and too scared at the same time." He didn't call Michael that night. He didn't call him the next week either. But he did, eventually, on a Tuesday in December, sit at his kitchen table with his old address book open to a number he'd had memorized for 15 years and never once dialed. And he wrote 3 sentences on a piece of paper before he let himself lose his nerve. "I was wrong. The light's still on. It always was for you." He mailed it before he could talk himself out of it, the way you rip off a bandage instead of peeling it. He didn't hear back that week or the next. Sam noticed him checking the mailbox on nights she came by, though he never said what for. "No answer yet," she said, not really a question. "No answer yet," he agreed. "That happens," she said. "Doesn't mean it's a no. Sometimes it just means the person needs longer than you want them to." It was strange, Walter thought, to be comforted by a 16-year-old about the exact same fear she was living out on the other end. Sam's own ending didn't arrive with fireworks. One night in January, she told him her mother had finally asked the hard question, the one about the stepfather, the one that mattered, and that things at home were changing, slowly, the way real things do. She didn't say it was fixed. She said it was different, and that she thought maybe she could go back and it wouldn't be the same house she left. "You don't have to," Walter said. "I know." She shouldered her bag. For once, she didn't check the street before opening the door. "But I think I want to try. If it doesn't work, your light's still on, right?" "Every night," Walter said. That was never in question. She hugged him on the porch steps, quick and a little embarrassed by it. And then she was gone down Birch Lane in the dark. Walter stood there a long time after her footsteps faded. The way you do when a house feels different than it did an hour ago. The letter came in February. It wasn't long. Michael wasn't ready for long, and Walter understood that better than anyone alive. But it had a phone number in it, and a single line that Walter read maybe 30 times before he let himself believe it. I saw the porch on Google Maps last year. The light was on. I didn't know why until I got your letter. He hasn't called yet. Not as of this telling. Some doors take longer to walk through than others, even once you know they're unlocked. But the light's still on. These days, if you drive down Birch Lane after midnight. Walter's isn't the only porch glowing anymore. It started with the Alvarez place across the street. Their youngest had taken to walking home late from the library. And one night, the mother simply left the light burning until she heard the front door. Then the Kowalskis, after their boy moved back home for a while, and the house felt too quiet when he left again. No one made an announcement. No one put up a sign. It just happened the way small things do in a town like this. One porch, then another, until the street held a scattered line of gold after dark. Most of the newer residents couldn't explain it if you asked them. They only knew the street felt less empty that way. Sam still visits, though less often now, and always by daylight, which Walter has decided to take as a good sign. She brings coffee sometimes. She sits on the steps in the sun instead of the ditch in the cold. Once she brought a small potted plant and left it by the door without ceremony. "Still keeping the light on?" she asked him this past spring. "Every night," Walter said. "Some habits you don't break just because the reason got easier." She nodded, as if that made sense to her in a way it wouldn't have a year ago. If you ever find yourself on Birch Lane after dark, cold, and unsure whether anyone's still awake, you'll know the house. It's the one that's been burning since before you got there. Not because anyone is certain you're coming, just in case you are. If you believe the world still needs stories about kindness, hope, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, welcome home. Subscribe to Bekalia Studios, and let's keep these stories alive together.